Hello and good afternoon. It is Tuesday, May the 10th. It is time for PLAR History and Geography, and it begins right now. We are entering week number 4 here at WASA Distance Ed. We are inspiring change through distance education since 1990. Since this is week number 4 for term 2B, we have only, do you know it, 5 more weeks left for this term, which means continue to work on its assignments. Again, our graduation date is June the 29th, that is Wednesday, for here at WASA. Again, just a reminder for all the PLAR students, the deadline to submit any PLAR assignments is Friday, June the 17th. So please submit your work before that due date. Again, the last day to submit any PLAR assignments is June the 17th. Any work that's submitted after this due date will not be marked. So again, please make sure you submit the work before this due date on June the 17th. Again, if you have any questions in regards to anything, just let me know. Like always, feel free to listen. You can listen by radio or call the WASA studio at 1-800-465-7144. Again, to get in touch with me, your teacher, in regards to any difficulties we can have your assignments or any comments. Again, just let me know. Feel free to give me a call during my office hours. Just call WASA or the 1-800 number. Just ask for Jonathan or enter my extension number. You can also reach me by email. I'm always on my email in my office. I'm always checking Facebook here and there as well. And you can always watch any pre-recorded lesson on my YouTube channels if you have missed anything. And you can also find it on the archive page. Again, if you have any questions, just let me know. Or you can talk to your DC and they can figure that out for you since they know all the information. Again, continue to work on those assignments. Again, my goal is to support all my students in regards to whatever you may need. My goal again is to give you ongoing feedback that is clear and precise and meaningful in a timely manner to support all your learning and achievements and your goals. That is why it is important that you continue to work on your assignments and submit them so that I can give you feedback, let you know how you're doing. That way you become a critical thinker, a flexible thinker, and that way you're one more step closer in achieving your goal and obtaining your Ontario High School diploma. Again, like always, you need your workbook and your textbook. If you have your textbook, you can follow along as we go through our lessons. Again, if you have internet access at home or in your community, again, download this Smart Bridget program. If you need difficulties, just ask your DC. They can help you with that. That way, you can see my smartboard screen with all my pictures and notes and whatnot. That way, you can type and write comments and questions on my screen live in class as well. Again, if you want a USB stick with all the slides and notes and all my lessons, again, I can get that to you absolutely for free. Just let me know if that will help you with your studies. Last week, we finished looking at Canada and its contribution and its involvement during the Second World War. Today, we're going to look at what happened after the Second World War. Okay, so we'll look at what happened after the Second World War. And today's class will be called After the Second World War and Defense Organizations, talking about some defense that was established on the world stage and internationally after the Second World War. In terms of timeline and time period, we're talking roughly in the 1940s, but mainly the 1950s. Not much excitement happened in the 40s. The 40s and the 50s were pretty much exactly the same. But again, we're focusing on the 50s, somewhat the 60s as well, but mainly the 40s and the 50s for today's class. So let's get to our learning goals and some of the topics that we will be talking and exploring and going over today in class so that we have a good understanding. Again, I'll write this out for everyone. Again, our learning goals and topics that we will be going over today is that we'll be going over, or I'll be talking about the Cold War and what that was all about. We'll also talk about human rights and legal rights in regards to the Bill of Rights. And we'll also be talking about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Then we're talking about the UN, the United Nations. We'll talk about a group called NATO, what they stand for and what their purpose and goals are. And finally, we'll talk about NORAD. Again, who they are and what they want to achieve. So that way there, class, is our learning goals for today. Again, the Cold War, the Bill of Rights, the Charter of Rights and Freedom, the UN, otherwise known as the United Nations, not NAFTA, but NATO, and NORAD. Okay, so that's our learning goal for today. But more specifically, over the next 60 minutes that we're here live in class, we'll be analyzing the impact of the Holocaust on Canadian society and on Canadians' attitude towards human rights. You will also be able to describe some key political developments and or government policies in Canada during this time period. Also, by the end of today's lesson in class, you'll be able to describe key development related to Canada's participation in the international community during this time period and assess whether these developments mark a change in Canada's approach to or role in international relations. And finally, you'll be able to describe some key development in Canada's relationship with the United States during this time period. Again, those are our learning goals and our objectives that you will be able to achieve by the end of today's class. If you are wondering what page we are on our textbook, I am page 16. Page 16 and 17. Those are the two pages needed for today's class. And by the end of today's class, we'll be going over assignment number 6. Okay, which means that we are almost done the history portion of this course. Alright, let's dive right into it and let's get started. So, I'm going to spend some time now in talking about the Cold War. The Cold War happened after the Second World War. This is not in your textbook, but again, I am just providing some additional background content that is happening during this time period that impacts Canada and the rest of the world and on the international stage. So the Cold War, again, it wasn't a war, nothing really happened, but a lot of tension developed during this time period, hence why it was known as the Cold War. It was mainly between the United States and the Soviet Union, also the USSR. It was mainly a political ideology-based conflict where the United States, they were democratic and they were also capitalists. Capitalist or capitalism. Okay, and they went up against, again, like I said, the Soviet Union, the USSR, otherwise had a political ideology of communism. Okay. If we are unfamiliar with capitalism and communism, again, those are just different political ideology that is formed by governments and how they view their empire. So, for example, the United States and the capitalists, they believe in private business People will own all factories and land, which leads to the means of productions. People own things. Individualism have rights, hence why it was more democratic, hence why it was known as capitalism. On the other hand, the Soviet Union and the communism, they were more as a different, kind of the opposite ideology. Communism, if we are unfamiliar, is an ideology of economic equality through elimination of private property. It is an economic and social reform based on property and resources that are owned by the state and that is owned by society, not by the individual. Again, there's a common ownership of all land where the ideal goal is that everyone is entitled to the same resource and the same goals. And the means of production is controlled by the state and by society. Okay, so that's communism and capitalism that was happening during the Cold War. Again, after the Second World War that ended in 1939, the USSR, the Soviet Union, and communism expanded eastwards and expanded into Eastern Europe. So now we have a little divide going on between Eastern and Western. The United States had fear that the Soviet Union, the USSR, would take over the world and expand communism amongst everyone else. Again, this development of the Cold War had development of atomic weapons, otherwise known as deadly armed race. It eventually expanded into space. The Soviet Union maintained a high level of military and army during this time period, even though the Second World War was over. Hence why there was a lot of tension, a lot of fear, a lot of unknown that could happen. Because of all the fear and unknown, people built bomb shelters in the backyard. They even practiced different drills and protocols in schools as well. Like I mentioned, the Soviet Union expanded their political ideology of communism into Eastern Europe, hence why it had a wall that divided Germany between Eastern Germany and West Germany. Again, the Berlin Wall was actually a physical wall that was actually built in 1963. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States were two nations that emerged after the Second World War, and they were known as the superpower. Two superpower nations emerged during this time period. Canada, for us, we were known as a middle power. We're not a superpower, but we're known as a middle power. Eventually, down the road, communism eventually collapsed and fell. Why, you may ask? Well, actually, as I mentioned, the means of production due in communism is owned by the states, which means that the working class and the poor class are always working around the clock in the factory to produce means of production. Eventually, the working class and the middle class outnumber the upper class and the states in authority. A revolution happens if the working class are not producing means of production, the state is not having products. Eventually, communism fell, and people wanted individualism, wanted more freedom, where people could own businesses and own factories that is private. Okay, a little nutshell based on capitalism and communism right there. Again, this is not in your textbook. Again, this is just some background additional content that's happening during the 1960s. Something needed to be done. Something needed to be done. As you recall, after the Second World War, when the Allied troops invaded Germany and Europe, when they free all the Jews from the Holocaust, they witnessed horror. They witnessed horror against Jews in Europe. More specifically talking about the Holocaust. Because of the events that transpired because of the Holocaust, due to fascism and Hitler and their government, again, it struck fear and horror across here in Canada and around the world. Canada started to change laws because of this event. We needed to do something needed to be done, and that was protect human rights. We needed to develop some kind of law or legislative that will protect human rights, that an event that would never ever see a Holocaust happen again. So we need to protect human rights, fundamental rights, and legal rights. But in the 50s and 60s, it was a time period that brought back peace and prosperity because the Second World War was ended. It was a period of optimism, and it was also a period of determining Canada's identity in terms of Canada's identity as a country that is still growing. Again, something that needs to be done was protect human rights so that something like the Holocaust would never happen again. Eventually, things changed, things happened, and that one change was the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights of 1958 was adopted and established by Canada's Prime Minister at this time, John Diefenbaker. The Bill of Rights was simply just a law. It had no more power than any other laws in Canada during this time. It had no provision of official languages, whether it was English or French. It was not a part of Canada's constitution, even though the Bill of Rights spoke upon fundamental freedom, legal rights, and equality before the law. Again, it was just simply another law, the Bill of Rights. If a law was discriminatory, the Bill of Rights was not helpful, and the Bill of Rights of 1958 only applied to federal law, not provincial laws. As you can see, the Bill of Rights was a great first step in recognizing human rights and fundamental freedoms, but it was just a law. Still discrimination, racism, and hate was still happening, so something else needed to be done, and eventually, as time progresses, and in the 80s, boom, we have the adoption of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms of 1982. The Charter of Rights and Freedom was entrenched into the Canadian Constitution in 1982, giving Canada's and Canadians legal rights to protect themselves against the government abusing individual powers. The creation of the Charter saw the dreams of Pierre Elliott Trudeau dreams come true, as it reinforced the fundamental rights and freedoms of Canadians. Again, like I mentioned, the Bill of Rights was simply just a law. It contained no provision on official languages. As a result of this, Trudeau felt that a constitution was needed to recognize the rights that the fact that Canada founded two official languages. Again, like I mentioned, the Bill of Rights was not a part of the Constitution. It had no more power than any other laws. The Bill of Rights, again, spoke upon fundamental freedoms, legal rights, and equality before the law. Like I said, however, if a law was discriminatory, the Bill of Rights was not helpful. As well, the Bill of Rights only applied to federal and not provincial laws. Because Canada's original constitution, here in Canada, our country, was an act of the British Parliament, and it can only be changed by Britain. By entrenching the Charter into the Constitution, the Canadian government will be allowed to make its own rules and changes without permission from Britain. The Charter is the supreme law in Canada, which means that all other laws must conform to the rights outlined in Charter. If there was a conflict in law, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms would take precedence. The Charter has improved the ability of Canadians to participate in society, and it has given important meaning to equal rights and protection to rights. And it has shaped and helped Canadians see their identity. Again, the Bill of Rights was created in 58, but it will eventually evolve and change into what we know as today as the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Again, the key word here is that it protects minority and against unfair treatment. The Charter of Rights applies to absolutely everyone. Me, you, everyone. Especially here in Canada. Okay, the Charter of Rights is the supreme law in Canada. Again, it's talk about fundamental and freedom rights. But more specifically, the Charter talks about fundamental freedoms, okay, whether it's consciousness, religion, thoughts, belief, opinion. We are all entitled to that to an extent. Again, with the Charter now in place, we have democratic rights, which means that we have the right to vote in an election. We have mobility rights, where we can enter, remain, or leave Canada or our province as we choose. We also have now legal rights, the rights to life, liberty, and security of a person, where we are not allowed to be arrested or detained without a reasonable cause to an extent. Again, most importantly, Section 15 of the Charter talks about equality rights. Equality rights, which is equal protection and equal benefits to everyone, no discrimination. Whether it's race, nationality, ethnicity, origin, religion, sex, age, mental, or physical disability. Again, we're all now equal under the Charter of Rights and Freedom. The way that Canadian government has treated minority groups before and post-Confederation has been similar. Before the Charter, often little could have been done about unfair laws, as we have seen throughout Lesson 1 and so far in Lesson 2 through our studies. Sometimes there are no protection for minority rights or fundamental freedom. The Charter protects Canadians who are from minority groups from unfair treatment. This shows and indicates violations of basic democratic rights cannot be prevented without constitutional guarantees, hence why our Charter was necessary. With the Charter in play, Canadian citizens, me and you, have a clearer recognition of human rights and freedoms and ways to enforce these rights. The Charter gives citizens a tool to see that the government and laws must respect their rights and freedoms. The concept of rule of laws applies to the Charter because everyone, even the government, must obey and follow the Charter. The Charter holds common values as a nation and a strong element of security as a nation. Again, it really shapes our identity, our beliefs, and our values. Again, if you want more information about the Charter, you can simply just Google the Charter, and it will list all the fundamental and legal rights that we as a citizen have. Again, all these rights we have, but they are limited to an extent in a way, give or take. Again, a little picture of Mr. Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, with our Queen Elizabeth signing the official document of the Charter of Rights and entrenching it into our Constitution. Again, this took place in 1982, a growth of the Bill of Rights. Something that I want to point out is that under the Charter, Section 35, it also protects Aboriginal rights as well. This is the first time ever, and I mean ever, that Aboriginal rights are now recognized. So under Section 35, subsection 1, and it says, and I quote, the existence, Aboriginal and treaty rights of Aboriginal peoples of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed. Definition of Aboriginal people of Canada, end quote. And the next section, section 35, subsection 2, it also says, and I quote, in this act, otherwise known as the Charter, Aboriginal people of Canada includes Indian, Inuit, Métis of people of Canada. Again, this is the first time ever, like I mentioned, that Aboriginal rights are now protected. Again, we now have equality amongst everyone. Again, it doesn't matter if it's based on race, nationality, ethnicity, origin, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability. We are now equal to one another. Again, also in the 70s and in the 80s, strong Aboriginal voice for the first time were recognized as Aboriginal identity have constitutional protection. Again, first time ever here in Canada. Again, you can see the growth and a pattern starting to change since we first started talking. Again, before in the early 20th century, in the 1900s, we saw a lot of hate, a lot of discrimination against new immigrants and even First Nations. But starting in the 80s and 70s, things start to change. Again, equality, a very important term. Again, I use that word equality a lot, but again, we may not know what it means. So why not spend some time and define equality? And also have the word equity on the screen as well. Equality versus equity. Okay, so the word equality, again, we have heard many times, it pretty much means same. That we are all the same. Equality promotes fairness and justice by giving everyone the same thing. But it can only work if everyone starts from the same place. Hence why my illustration on the left, when talking about the same, everyone's on the same platform. Okay? That's equality. Everyone promotes fairness and justice. Everyone's given the same thing. Is that fair? Well, I'll let you decide that. However, equity, again, a term that we may not necessarily hear a lot and know what it means, but equity simply means fair. Okay, we're talking about being fair. It's about making sure people get access to the same opportunities. Sometimes our differences and our history can sometimes create barriers and challenges in order to participate in society. So therefore, we must ensure equity before we can enjoy equality. Okay? Because we all come from different backgrounds, different circumstances, and different conditions, and because of history and just the way it is, and colonization and imperialism and all those factors, you and I, me and you, can be sometimes different. Our history can be different based on socioeconomic status, ethnicity, gender, and even learning style, for example. Okay, so we're talking about fairness. Where everyone is given the same opportunity. Okay, whether it's modification or accommodation, we're talking about fair. Like I said, equity must be ensured before we can have equality. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, all this even applies to learning as well. Okay, equity and equality. All right, so let's continue. A new international era. So, post-war, after the Second World War, Canada entered a period of more desire to participate in world affairs. We want to engage more internationally on the world stage. We want to be recognized and we want to help out. That was Canada's goal after the Second World War. Canada quickly became a major player on the world stage. Hence why we got our names out there. So the next couple slides, we're going to talk about three things. United Nations, the UN, then we'll talk about NATO, then we'll talk about NORAD. Okay, all of these three will be on your assignments. Okay, United Nations, UN, NATO, and NORAD. Okay, so when I get to those slides, make sure you pay close attention. Alright, so let's start things off by looking at the UN. Okay, otherwise known as United Nations. Again, all of this is on page 17 in your textbook. Okay, you can find all this information in your textbook, but by listening and by following along throughout my lessons, it's more background content and knowledge. So the UN was created by Britain, United States, China, and the United Soviet Socialist Republic. Okay, so Britain, United States, China, and the United Socialist Republic, they are all a part of the UN. However, since they created the UN, they are under this subdivision, this category known as the Central Body, although otherwise known as the Central Security. These countries, these nations, and these groups, Britain, United States, China, and the United Soviet Socialist Republic, have the right to veto any UN action. In other words, they can block any UN actions if they desire. So if a decision is being made, they can block it, they can disagree it, since they are part of the Security Council of the UN. The UN simply is an expansion from the United Nations. Again, we went over what the United Nations was back in lesson number 1, but simply the UN and the United Nations is an expansion of the League of Nations because the League of Nations was not successful. And as a result, the UN has the same purpose and has the same goals as the League of Nations. So if you know what the League of Nations goals were, you simply already know what the UN goals are. So the goals of the UN are simply to prevent future wars. Again, we had World War I from 1914 to 18. And then we had the Second World War. Okay, again, we don't want any more future wars to break out, even to this point in modern time. Again, prevent future wars, maintain international peace and security around the world. Okay, so we want peace, we want to be happy, we want to make everyone happy so that no conflict or crisis will arise. Another goal is to improve the quality of life and promote world peace. Doing what we can to help others around the world who are in need, whether it's in natural disasters or whatnot. People who are part of the UN are there to help, again, promote world peace. Again, we all want to be happy, we all want to have freedom, have a voice, and whatnot. The UN also protects and respects the basics of human rights. Again, we know what human rights are. We talked about the Bill of Rights, the charters. Again, having legal rights as an individual, as a citizen. Here in Canada, Canadians, we have that, which is outlined in a charter because it's in the Constitution. We want to promote that not just here in Canada, but around the world as well. The UN works together to solve issues based on economics, social, cultural, and humanitarian problems as well. Okay, so again, helping each other around the world, doing what we can, and also develop friendly relationships with one another around the globe. Again, those are the functions and the goals that UN countries and nations want to promote. Again, prevent future wars from happening, maintain international peace and security, improve the quality of life, promote world peace, promoting human rights, and all those other factors as well. Canada. Yes, we as Canada, Canada is a part of the UN as well. And no surprise there. However, we have a slightly different role compared to everyone else. Canada, our role, a part of the UN, is peacekeeping. Okay, peacekeeping, something that we can be extremely proud of from our soldiers and our troops, men and women around the world. Again, peacekeeping, again, if there's a conflict, our goal as peacekeepers is to promote peace so that nothing happens. Also, Canada's role within the UN is to serve and uphold to prevent war from breaking out. Again, same thing. Canada has an international reputation of fairness. We want to be fair. We do our job as peacekeepers, and we have a reputation for that. Again, something that we as Canadians can be extremely proud of. And it also demonstrates moving away from the British Empire. Again, we have talked many times that Canada is a colony of the British Empire. By doing all these roles, we're slowly creating and shaping our own identity that is away from the British Empire. So that's the UN. That's Canada part of the UN. Next, NATO. NATO. Again, you can find NATO on page 17 in your textbook. All the information are there in your textbook, especially on page 17. So NATO. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Again, NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Make sure you know what NATO stands for. You'll see it pop up many times. Again, in the aftermath of the Second World War, with much of Europe in ruins, millions of people displaced, the horrors of the Holocaust, and a recent memory and an uneased peace splitting the European continent, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was founded. Again, it was founded in 1949. NATO tied the security of European democracies to American military power in order to deter and was the Soviet Union expansion and aggression. In 1955, West Germany joined NATO, and as a result, the Soviet Union retaliated by creating their own group known as the Warsaw Pact. For decades, Europe was fractured by ideology, economic systems, and outlooks. So, basically what NATO is, it's a treaty organization. Canada is a part of NATO. So basically, if any country who is a part of NATO, if the United States or any European countries or any countries who are a part of NATO and they are under attack, it basically means that other countries a part of NATO will come and help. So for example, Canada, since we are a part of NATO, and if something happens to Canada, and if we were under attack, other countries a part of NATO, United States and European countries, will come and help based on the treaty organization. It's basically protection, provision, and preparation. Back then, It was to stop the expansion of the Soviet Union's empire and to stop communism. Communism. NATO is made up of alliance, again, team up with one another. I'll help you if you help me. Made up of Christian and democratic countries. Again, is to help to stop fear against the Soviet Union and to help stop the spread of communism. However, not everyone is allowed to be a part of NATO. Some countries are excluded and some countries are included. However, NATO, this is the first time that Canada signed a military treaty. First time ever in Canada. Today, NATO remains the most important allies in the world. Unlike other international bodies and forums, NATO has provided its ability to influence global affairs by not only shaping military outcomes, but also have a stable world order by its virtues and simply by its own existence. NATO is rocked upon with diplomacy and military planning remains constant. Again, the exclusion of Ukraine in the allies of NATO is kind of like our collection and our collective of shame. Because if you think about it, a couple years back when Russia invaded Crimea, if Ukraine and Crimea back then was a part of NATO and Russia invaded Crimea, NATO and other countries part of NATO would have to defend and help Ukraine. Hence why certain countries were excluded from NATO, simply because NATO and NATO countries didn't want to go up against Russia. Hence why Ukraine was not a part of NATO. It's still not a part of NATO today. Because if something would ever happen to Ukraine or Crimea, we will have to be involved as well. So again, as a class, what we need to remember is that NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization and what its goals and its purpose are. If something happens to European countries or whoever is part of NATO, others will come and help as well. Protection, provision, preparation. Again, a little map of which countries are a part of NATO. So anything that's highlighted in dark blue on my map, they are a part of NATO. Again, Canada, United States, a lot of Western European countries. Okay. Not so much Eastern Europe, but some are, give or take. So again, NATO, highlighted in dark blue. If something ever happens to any of these dark blue countries, everyone else would have to come and help based on that agreement. And like I mentioned, the Soviet Union retaliated. They responded to NATO, and they created something known as the Warsaw Pact, which mainly consisted of European countries during that time. Again, with the spread of communism back then in the 60s and in the 50s, Europe was basically divided into Western and Eastern. Okay? Again, it's like an imaginary line that divides the continent in half, whether it was Western or whether it was Eastern. A lot of Eastern European countries had links and ties to Russia and with the communist ideology. Hence why a Cold War broke out against communism versus capitalism, the United States versus the Soviet Union, two superpowers at that time. Last slide. I want to talk about NORAD. 1958, NORAD. NORAD stands for North American Aerospace Defense Command. It is basically an agreement between Canada and the United States. But more importantly, if you think about it, based on my studies, is a lot of American influence here in Canada. A lot of American influence because of NORAD. Again, NORAD stands for North American Aerospace Defense Command. The purpose and goal of NORAD is simply to monitor man-made objects in space, advanced missile technology. It basically provides a warning sign against planes and missiles. Again, a Cold War is breaking out. Again, we talk about the Cold War and the Soviet Union having a high level of military, creating nuclear weapons and doing what? We don't know. So again, it created a lot of fear and a lot of unknown here in Canada based on a Canadian public society. A lot of Canadians, a lot of publics, we agreed upon NORAD. We like it because again, it helps us from danger and from being under attack. However, it also, like I mentioned, a lot of American influences. It allows the United States to control Canada's air forces without our approval. Okay, at this point in time, as we are moving away from the British Empire, creating our own identity, we had strong links and ties with our neighbor down states, the United States. But NORAD in the end was very, very successful. Even though it was more American influences, where they pretty much pay for all the costs, but it allowed Americans to control Canada's air forces without our own approval. They can do whatever they want here in Canada without our permission. Again, to further illustrate NORAD, again, here in Canada we have radar lines. Okay, there's 3 of them that goes across our country. One near the border of Canada and the United States, one central Canada, and one pretty much in northern Canada. These radar lines detect and see if there are any attacks that are coming to our country or to the continent of North America. Again, the Soviet Union, these guys over here, they are developing nuclear weapons during that time period, and they could simply attack Canada, United States, North America if they wanted. And as a result, we created a radar system. Again, these radar lines, and they simply detect if there are any attacks coming away. It could be a missile attack, could be a plane attack, it could be a whatever attack. Okay, these lines' jobs are to detect it, and they see it, they can block it, they can destroy it before it destroys our country or whatnot. Okay, but again, it's mainly based on American influences during this time period. So that's NORAD. Again, class, what we need to know about NORAD is that it monitors man-made objects in space. Could be missile, could be whatever. Again, make sure you know what NORAD stands for. Alright, to conclude and wrap up today's lesson in class, the Cold War lasted a pretty long time. It really did not end until the 1990s. So that tension and that fear between the United States, the Soviet Union, capitalism, communism, was going on up until the 90s, okay, which is pretty much recently. Eventually, Russia, the Soviet Union, the communist ideology fell. A guy named Gorbachev came into Russia and created all of these laws that people wanted to see, and these laws promotes freedom, and eventually collapsed, and we concluded no more communism was there. And that Berlin Wall that we talked about that divide Eastern and Western Germany, that wall fell down. But here in Canada, it was a period of the baby boom, where tons, and I mean tons of babies were being born. Around 4 million babies were born in this decades, in the 1950s. Okay, 4 million babies were born during this time period. Why? Because World War II ended in 1945. People came home. People were happy. Time of optimism. Time of prosperity. People were making a lot of babies. Hence why we had the baby boom. Around 4 million babies were born during this decade. Again, that is just roughly what happened in the 50s. Other than that, the 40s and the 50s were not that exciting here in Canada. All right, enough of that. Let's get to assignment number 6 questions, and then we'll wrap things up and call it a day. So assignment 6, again, all you need for assignment 6 is simply page 16 and page 17 in your textbook. Boom, that's all you need. Okay, 2 simple pages, very straightforward. Assignment 6 only out of 9 marks. Again, doesn't get any easier and simpler than this. Question number 1, why did Canada feel it was necessary to create the Bill of Rights and the Charter of Rights and Freedom? Outline what these laws were designed to enforce. Hint, hint, talking about the Holocaust. And basically tell me what the Bill of Rights and the Charter of Rights and Freedom outlined it. Okay, what did it say? Okay, fundamental freedoms, fundamental rights, legal rights. Okay, tell me what they are. Again, that's on the bottom of page 16, if you are wondering. Question number 2, what has been the main function of the UN? In other words, what is the function of the UN? Okay, the UN, United Nations, what are their goals? What are their purpose? What do they want to achieve? Hint, hint. Prevent future wars. Hint, hint. Okay? That's on page, the very top of page 17, if you are wondering. And the last 2 questions talks about NATO and NORAD. What does NATO stand for? Okay, 4 complete sentences. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And what is its purpose? Again, question number 4, NORAD, what does it stand for? And its purpose. Boom, a mark each. Simple as that. And that were their class are the 4 questions on assignment number 6. Again, all you need is page 16 and 17 in your textbook. But if you have been listening closely to today's class, there should not be any problems at all. If you do need help, again, feel free to give me a shout by call, by Facebook, by in person, or whatnot. I'm here to help. Okay, I'm here to help. Just to remind everyone, deadline to submit any PLAR work is Friday, June the 17th. Okay, so please make sure you submit all your work and assignments before this due date. If you want to write any tests, make sure you do it before this due date. Remember, our graduation date is June the 29th. Happening here in Siligao over at Pelican Falls, I believe. Could be wrong, but pretty sure it's over at Pelican. So again, any potential grads, again, finish what you need to finish so that we can see you in June for graduation. And that's it. That's it for today's class. So on Thursday, we will start lesson number 3. We'll start lesson number 3. We'll look at Quebec, province of Quebec in the 1960s, what all the fun that they're having. But that pretty much wraps up today's class and our lesson number 2. Okay? All right. Let's call it a day. And I'll see everyone on Thursday. Thank you so much.